Aloha. My name is Lori Yancura, and I will be delivering this the holiday quarter of 2021, webinar for the Rural Family Speak About Resilience Project. It's called Politics, Food, and Football, Helping Rural Families Navigate Conflict Over the Holidays. Now, before we begin the official webinar, I'd like us to gather our thoughts and send messages of hope and healing to those in Kentucky. I was watching the news as I practiced delivering this webinar and stopped as I heard the reporter describe a conversation she had with a woman who was combing through the rubble where a church had been. The woman was looking for handbells. Parishioners had been practicing for a Christmas celebration before the tornado. I like to believe that she found those handbells and that they will be able to give a concert as a symbol of hope. Now, I decided not to switch gears, so I'm going to go ahead with my original presentation, but I feel a little strange here because my examples are so much more commonplace than those that people are experiencing who've gone through severe disasters. But I do want to assure you that some of the skills that we're going to talk about today may also help us give some small comfort to those affected by such massive tragedies. So here we are. As I mentioned before, my name is Lori Yancura, and I'm from the University of Hawaii. I've been with the Rural Family Speak project in its various iterations for about 15 years. And I've been working with it from populations here in Hawaii. And believe it or not, Hawaii is very rural, but we also have our own unique cultures and traditions. And one of those you will see in the bottom corner of this slide. For special occasions and holidays, people like to eat mochi, which is a delicious Japanese treat made out of sticky rice flour and a bunch of other delicious things. So I'd like to offer you this virtual mochi to munch on while you listen to our presentation. As we've already gone over, here's just a reminder of the webinar format. We had an introduction by the incomparable Dr. Brianna Ralph from Montana State University. My presentation here will take about 20 minutes, and then here comes the fun part, will be the facilitated discussion in the breakout rooms, and we've got some really good topics for you to talk about, and I'm excited to hear what you come up with. And then we will all come together in a large group and share our findings. So this webinar is approved by NCFR, the National Council for Family Relations, as continuing educations for CFLEs, Certified Family Life Educators. And today's learning objectives are to learn how family stress theories can help professionals, such as yourselves, benefit from research findings grounded in the experiences and perspectives of low-income rural families. Identify ways to apply these findings to your specific educational programming and community outreach, and then to brainstorm strategies to develop resilience in rural families with other outreach professionals. So I'm going to start with some theory, and pretty heavy on the theory. This is Hamilton McCubbin's ABCX model of family stress. As you can see, it's quite complicated. And if you really want to see complicated, there's the double ABCX model of stress. But we'll focus on this for right now. And I've always felt that it's helpful to think of this model as rings of influence, and that the easiest way to understand these rings, and the entire model in fact, is to work our way outside in. I used to think that the rings are arranged in order of influence on the family, like Bronfenbrenner's model. But as I thought more about it and gained more practical experience in applying theory to practice, I realized that these rings can be thought of as being organized another way. And, listen to my inner instructor voice here, I'd like you to think about other ways that these rings might be organized as I describe them. We'll come back to that after we talk a little bit about each ring. Here's the outside ring. It's labeled external context. And these are the big picture things to think about. The forest, heredity, development, economy, history, and culture. And our field has focused quite a bit on cultural contexts over the last decade or so, particularly those related to ethnicity and immigration. However, I'd like to point out that there are many, many ways to think about culture. Rurality is a culture in and of itself. And by rurality, I mean an overall rural identity, as well as specific regional identities. And you are all experts on the cultures of the groups that you work with, and it's important to think about them as you think about stress and coping in these families. Now, the middle ring is labeled internal context. And because this is a family theory, it speaks to dynamics internal to the family. This includes family structure, the psychological environment of the family, and the philosophical environment, which refers to such philosophies such as parenting and punishment styles. And finally, the center ring, it's the heart of the family stress and coping process. Remember here that this is a family level theory, so we're talking about an event influencing the whole family. The family's perceptions of the nature and severity of the event and the resources that the family has to manage that event. What I really like about this model is that it emphasizes how both perceptions and resources help determine the degree of stress that's associated with this event. If you think about it, this is a mind-blowing concept. Mind blown. Whether an event is stressful or not depends on our perceptions of the impact of that event and the resources that we perceive we have to deal with that event. So if you think about that, that has a lot of implications for how we as professionals can help people get through these events. So remember a couple slides ago that I told you I used to think that the rings were arranged in order of their influence on the family? Well, that may be, but we could also look at it as showing us that these rings are in order of how we can influence the family. We really don't have a lot to say about culture and history. We don't have much influence there. But we can influence how people perceive events and their resources to deal with them. So this means that although we definitely need to consider those outside circles, we can have the most impact if we focused on the inner circle. And here we have a slightly modified model of stress and coping. My scholarly background is focused on individual stress and coping. That's what I wrote my dissertation on. And I think that it's best to think about things with a modified model with a little bit of both elements, the family stress and coping and the individual stress and coping, because we basically work with individuals most of the time, although their stressors might be family related. And I've included some references at the end of this presentation of both types of theories if you'd like to look at the details. So with this model, I'm going to go from left to right. The initiating event on the on the left is a stressor. Note that a stressor is not equal to stress. That's similar to the ABCX model. The event is separate from whether it is stressful or not. In our applied work, I believe it's important to focus on what comes in between the stressor and the perceived stress. In the most widely used model of stress and coping, Richard Lazarus's model, the in-between consists of two elements. The first element is appraisals, which involves split-second decisions of both the event and an individual's perception of what they have to manage the event. So the appraisal is sort of what the person sees the event, but it involves both perception of the event itself and the resources people have to deal with the event. And then there's coping. And coping is how the strategies that a person uses to manage that event. Let's start with stressors. Now, we can't change these external events, but it's important for us to understand specifically the stressors of rural families. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I want to point out that rural families face unique stressors, and there are a lot. On the left side of the screen, you can see one of my favorite sources of information on rural areas, the Rural Health Information Hub. And that hub tells us there's a whole alphabet of stressors to learn about. But on the right side of the screen, I've narrowed those down a lot to the everyday stressors that we come across time and time again in our work with the RFSH project. And these are not necessarily in order of severity. There's childcare, huge stressor for rural families, money, and transportation. And I've included some specific references to our work at the end of the webinar that can help you understand those a little more thoroughly. And in the bottom of this slide, I've included some stressors that are currently a pretty big deal for rural areas and others. There's COVID. I'm sure you've heard of a little thing called the COVID pandemic. Weather-related stressors, not only the severe tornadoes, but there are also issues with crops and global warming and issues like that. Then, of course, the political climate. And the main topic of this webinar is relationships. Now, it's important to note that these stressors are not mutually exclusive. So, for example, the most stressful relationship issues revolve around childcare, money, and transportation. So these things kind of build upon each other. Now, the next phase of our model is appraisal. And Lazarus emphasizes that appraisals are cognitive events. So that means they involve rapid calculations of both the potential impact of the stressor and the resources that the individual has to manage it. The original list of perceptions focused on 4 potential ways that people could appraise that event. They could think of it as harmful, potentially harmful to themselves or their families, threatening, leading to loss, or as a challenge. And there are a couple of things to think about here. Studies have shown that the appraisal of something as a challenge can lead to growth and resilience. So stressors are not only, stressors can be good news if we learn something from coming out the other side in a positive way. So that's associated with the perception of a stressor as a challenge. And the other thing I like about this perspective is that it allows for deciding that a stressor is not stressful. I personally love this one because I'm a freaker outer. Oftentimes when I take the time to slow down and think about a potential stressor, I'll realize that it's not a big deal. This view is also can help in the light of the current circumstances. Current events. My problems are absolutely nothing in comparison to what those families in Kentucky's are facing. So sometimes a problem is not a problem. Appraisal also involves resources. This is what an individual perceives that he or she has to help them manage this stressor. These resources can be internal, such as skills and experience, or external, coming from other family members or community resources. And as helping professionals, we can influence both areas. We can teach and build internal skills within people, or we can provide external resources to help them. So in my experience, in light of families, the most important internal resource involved in appraisals is perspective taking. This is considering others' motivations, experience, life history, and general point of view. This also encompasses getting a picture of the big picture. What is the goal here? Is the goal to be right, or is it to preserve a family relationship? Now, I'm not saying that preserving the relationship is always the best thing, but sometimes if people can slow themselves down a little bit and think about the ultimate goal, it can help them cope with some pretty difficult situations. After an individual has appraised an event and determined whether it is, in fact, a stressor, he or she can then employ coping strategies to lessen the impact of that stressor. I like to think of coping repertoires as a toolbox of strategies that individuals can use to manage stressors. Now, I'll only have the time to touch the surface of these as well. I'll cover a few, but I'm hoping that you will be able to expand this list in your breakout groups. One way to cope with stress is to anticipate it. That is, to think ahead of strategies to deal with problems before they arise. I've included a good reference for this at the end of the presentation. Communication skills are also an excellent way to manage stressors. Examples are the 4 sides model of communication and the Aikido strategy. That is, align, agree, redirect, and resolve. Coping doesn't have to be a solitary endeavor. Sometimes the best strategy is to ask for help from other family members or for professionals in the community. And then the last item is escape. I like to call that the Kenny Rogers approach, because he's told us you got to know when to fold them. And that applies to stressors as well. But it's important to know that there are many ways to escape. Substance abuse is actually a powerful way to escape from stress. The problem is that it only lasts for a short time. When the effect wears off, you've got more problems to face. But some forms of escape are healthy. Before family visits, my husband and I work on helping each other out with escape hatches, where one of us will help the other one get some alone time. Okay, so there you have it. We've just talked in detail about stress and coping theories and how they can give us some valuable insights. And I just want to emphasize here is, even though we focused on the inner rings of this model, the outer rings can also give us some very strong clues for how to manage situations successfully. So we've just got another minute or two to go through a quick example, and then you'll go to your breakout rooms. So Kate, pictured here, is a single mom of 2 girls. Christmas is financially difficult for her. She's picked up an extra job to get the girls some presents, but there's still not a lot of money left over. Her sister-in-law, let's call her Cruella, is married to Kate's brother. We'll call him Ted. Cruella and Ted have a lot more money than Kate does. One day, Cruella texts Kate with an idea. Cruella wants to buy some very expensive gifts for Kate's daughters. Kate, already exhausted from her holiday schedule, doesn't like that idea. She can't afford to buy expensive gifts for Cruella and Ted's 4 spoiled children. What should Kate do? Well, according to our model, she first appraises the extent of the stressor and the resources she has to deal with it. Is it even a problem? Maybe Cruella and Ted love Kate's little family and genuinely want to give their girls gifts with no strings attached. Problem solved. If it's not a problem, it's not a problem. If this isn't the case, Kate might want to consider the potential impact of the situation on their relationship. Is Cruella trying to teach her boys to be kind to others? Is Cruella the kind who expects to be treated well and holds a grudge? Kate could also consider other resources that might be useful. Is there anywhere she can go for help with her decision? Can she go to her pastor? Or to help her communicate with Cruella? Maybe Cruella truly doesn't understand. Does she have access to any employee discounts? Is this a teachable moment to emphasize that the best gifts don't have to be expensive? What are some alternative options? And then with that in mind, Kate can come up with some coping strategies. She might manage expectations ahead of time. She might talk to Cruella and Ted and the boys and let them know what her experiences are. She could have some other family members pool for gifts. So they could have extravagant gifts, but only for one person, sort of a Secret Santa kind of thing. Or she might give experiences such as personal time or talent, or even place-based experiences such as leading a hike or a camp out. Or she might just ask Cruella and Ted and their boys to give to the less fortunate. Another teachable moment. So those are just some quick ideas that I ran through very quick in the interest of time, as how you can use the theory to go through real life strategies. And now to the breakout room discussion. Nadia's family has gathered for Christmas Eve dinner for as long as she can remember. This year, she is hosting it at her house. Nadia, her husband, and 2 of their 3 children have received the COVID vaccine. Nadia's youngest child, Ali, has not been vaccinated because he's only 3 years old. Ali suffers from severe asthma. Nadia's sister-in-law, Alyssa, calls to tell Nadia that her family of 2 adults and 4 kids will be coming for dinner. Alyssa does not believe that COVID is life-threatening. No one in Alyssa's family has been vaccinated for COVID, and Nadia is worried about their vaccination status, especially its influence on little Ollie. So think about that scenario for a little bit as you go to your breakout rooms, and we'll talk more when you come back.